The Chronicles of Elliptus, Part 1, by R.L.T.K. Reginald. Orated by Sir Richard Bunkslot. Copyright 2017. All rights held by the R.L.T.K. Reginald Literaturial Institute. Chapter 1. Cheese and Blood.
"Mind how you go on your way home, Stevus,"
said the cheesemaker's wife, Betsley, an impossibly fat, impossibly doting, and impossibly out-of-touch matron with impossibly white hair, who still viewed Stevus as little more than a wee sprout, though he himself was indeed closing in on the age of 30.
"There are wild animals would set upon ye, and rumours of those hooligans causing a raw ruckus besides,"
she continued, with an outrageous degree of concern. Stevus placated the old worried woman, smiling, and said to her, "I have walked to and fro 1,000 times between your cheesery and my father's cottage, and I know the way very well indeed." In truth, until the trees had grown taller somewhat in recent years, Stevus could see his father's cottage quite clearly from the cheesery's front door. But Stevus was too polite, and old Betsley too well-meaning for any irritation to show. He had been through this ritual concern before many times.
"I thank you for the share of wonderful cheese. Father will be as pleased as always."
And with that took his leave. Carrying out these sorts of errands always fell upon Stevus, as his father, Stufus, had never had the use of his legs as far as Stevus's memory could reach. Before he was halfway up the knoll upon which his father's cottage was situated, he began to hear his father's wails. He often did that. Stufus was a clog-maker by trade, which constantly made him rue the fact that he no longer had the use of his legs, and feet, for clogs are, after all, for feet. "What a cruelty!" his father would often exclaim. He was a bitter man, but still he carried on, knowing nothing else beside his craft. And how he wailed! Some of the locals thought that he was possessed. Others quietly gossiped that someone should just slip some poison into his porridge and put an end to his misery. But he was the only clog-maker for 50 leagues, and so that was that settled. Stevus peeked into his father's workshop, the door, as always, ajar. Another pair of clogs started, taking shape beneath the blade of his keen stock-knife as he levered it with a muscular arm, and grunted only so slightly. It was just past mid-morning, and he had already completed one pair and begun a second. He was nothing if not skilled and swift at his trade, and fair enough, he was become nothing but his trade, in a way.
"Father,"
said Stevus,
I am returned from the cheesery with our share."
His father glowered at him and said nothing.
"When will the clogs be ready for me to take, the last clogs? I plan still to leave this afternoon, if that is all well,"
he added. Stufus looked up from his work, with tight lips and nostrils flared, eyes squinting at the bright light shining through the now open doorway. For the time of the day was just such that the sun did shine directly in, though whether his dejected melancholy or the keen concentration of work contributed more to the severe appearance such a squint gave his face was indeed anyone's guess.
"They'll be bloody done when they're bloody done,"
he wailed, and his words then trailed off into a wordless, frustrated grunt. His father's hysterical vocalizations and screaming and shouting no longer frightened Stevus as once it did. His father was a troubled, sad man after all, and Stevus understood that better than anyone. He then took his leave, for there were many domestic things to see to. Nevertheless, some odd compellence, nebulous, though not quite angstful, and angst Stephus did know quite well, caused him to tarry a brief moment in the doorway as he turned to leave. "Wait," his father then called after him, quietly, an uncanny timbre in his voice. "There is someone to see you in the cottage." Stephus was then gripped by intrigue, and so he broke from his father's suddenly peculiar gaze and continued on into the cottage, delicious cheese wheels in tow. When he opened the door, he was as delighted as he was astonished. There sat a man by the name of Dankledink Grimwilk, a hulk of a man, with bushy red hair tied back into a messy, lopsided bun, a ghostly grey beard cropped short to his angular jaw, with pitch-black eyebrows met over top the bridge of his vein-ed, bulbous red nose, and a notable gap there was between his two front teeth, which were large and square. Perhaps most absurd, though, were his eyes. One was yellow, and the other, his lazy eye, was in almost fluorescent indigo. He was 20 stone, of paunchy round gut, muscle and thick bone, and stood considerably shorter than Stephus, who was himself not exceptionally heighted. There he sat, helping himself to a variety of victuals set upon a beechen kitchen slab, and swilling ale, the foam from which imbued his moustache right the way up to his nose. "Stephus, my boy!" he boomed with zealous delight, before then assuming an affect much more grave. "Oh, how long it has been, and how long, too, have I been endeavoring to make my way here to you. You see, I have been delayed by nearly a half-fortnight." Stephus began to feel a burgeoning sense of unease. Dankledink was not a man to be delayed by much of anything, or anyone, and his tone and timbre did hold within it something grave indeed. Dankledink locked him in a gaze both intense and regretfully resolute, with his queer yellow eye. His indigo was somewhere off to his right, and spoke thusly to him. "My boy, you are safe here no longer." Stephus wailed, and he reeled, not unlike his father, not a shrill cry of misery and woe, but a wail of panic, anxiety, and utter confused fear, and then darkness was all round him. When he came to, the taste of ale was in his mouth, tepid, flat, viscous, and burning with alcohol, and he nearly gagged. It was a signature of Dankledink's renown, his libation and his principal sustenance, and he drank it alongside all his meals, and in between them, and even at intervals throughout the night. Even the small mouthful of the bracing ale Stephus had swallowed had started a wave of fuzzy warmth and relaxation coursing through his limbs. Dankledink had taken the liberty of parting a fresh wheel of cheese asunder. "You are awake. I am sorry to have caused you to faint, but such is your wont, and has been as long as I can recall. I spake only to you what I needs must, and what I have travelled far and through much danger to tell you," he finished, dunking a large shard of the hard, dry cheese into his dank flagon of boozy ale before biting it in half, while skilfully stifling a flatulent belch, seemingly by swallowing it whole, dragging it back into the digestive pit from whence it came. Stephus felt his head spin once more at the words, but the ale had fortified him. Some contrivance of Dankledink's brewing prowess, he supposed, beyond mere inebriation, and he remained bravely fixed upon Dankledink's words. "My boy, I am driven by necessity, by death and by steel and bloody viscera, to tell you true and quick why I have come. It has been 15 long years since I have seen you, and as long alike since I have seen your father, my dear friend, brother in all but blood. But I cannot tarry, nor can you, for I have come to spirit you away from danger great." Stephus should have fainted again at that, but something about that familiar yet strangely mysterious ale again allayed his usual reaction. "Your father will live long and be fine. Do not worry over him. The villagers have none else to craft their clogs. They may even give him an apprentice, and if not, surely someone to take your place and fetch his errands at the very least." Just then the door flew open. Stephus's heart froze. Suddenly, terrifyingly, 5 men sprang through the door, lithe, quick, hardened killers by the look of them, garbed in dark, earthy brown gambesons and thick woolen coats stained with mud and with blood, and donned with scruffy beards, and armed, one with a spike-head mace, 3 with cunningly pointed short swords, and the last with a long sword and buckler. An uncanny air there was about them, and evident it was that they were no common brigands. An evil intent smouldered in their eyes, and when they gazed upon Stephus, it was as though it was blown into a frenzied fire in an instant. Dankledink sprang up and forth with delight. In fact, he hardly seemed surprised, while right-handedly hurling a wheel of cheese with great speed towards the cloaked devils. The one stone wheel of cheese hit the rightmost of the assailants, the last through the door, squarely in the face, crushing his head against the wall, the hard, ripe cheese annihilating the man's skull as though it were a melon, ripe and juicy, the white shards of his cranial bones redolent of the pale rind of the sweet summer fruit. While Stephus sat transfixed and gawking wide-eyed upon the bloody, broken ruin of the man whose life had just been snuffed out by a wheel of cheese, Dankledink had subdued 2 more of the wretched fiends by way of using the first man's leg, severed at an acute angle just below the left knee, sharpening the tibia within into a makeshift and morbid anatomical spear, to skewer the both through and pin them hapless against the wall of the quaint cottage. And so, as Stephus broke away from the one morbid scene, he was met only with another. The sight was sickening, jarring, utterly depraved, but nonetheless he couldn't avert his now bulging eyes, as the man sandwiched between the wall and his dead comrade's body spewed forth blood from his mouth, moaning, or rather gurgling, in between boluses of vomit violently cast forth, no doubt containing some measure of his pulverized and now free-flowing entrails. It seemed to Stephus that the man was in eternity in his death throes. The cheese-wheel man's instant death now appeared a mercy compared to his. Finally, he broke away to see Dankledink making sportful game of the final 2 men. Dankledink was yet unharmed. The other 2 could not say the same. Both were cut and bleeding all over, as Dankledink's humble blade, short, light, and fiendishly sharp, flashed and darted faster than Stephus would have thought possible, let alone wielded by a short, fat man with a lazy eye whose paunchy gut might have weighed half as much as Stephus himself did. Dankledink finally ended the fourth of his foes as he fell to his knees from sheer exhaustion and blood loss, parting him asunder. But not in the way you might think. No, not Dankledink, swordsman and strong man in equal measure, of renown upon renown amongst those across the land of Elliptus learned of such skills. No, he ended his foe by entering him atop his skull as he knelt before him, and exiting out his groin as each perfect half of the man fell apart. What might have taken a lesser man 100 blows took Dankledink only a single. He had sundered him lengthwise. The final man knelt upon one knee, sword and buckler held at the ready, though wounded and winded. Dankledink, grinning cheesily, moved quickly, feigning a sideways slash at his lower right flank. The man took the bait and parried with sword, as Dankledink in his speedful skill suddenly changed his sword's course, his humble blade parting the man's arm above the elbow, striking down from above. Another blow followed like lightning, and his buckler arm was gone at the shoulder. The man screamed a scream of utter and complete affright. Dankledink then snicked off both of his ears, kicked him in the scrot, skewered him through the midsection, punched him in the face with his opposite hand's clenched fist, before withdrawing the blade from his viscera. The man, armless, fell forward onto his face with naught to break his fall. Dankledink then intently hacked both his legs from his armless body as he lay prostrate upon his stomach, spat upon him, and left him to bleed out. The floor of the cottage in its entirety was now slickened with a thick film of blood. Not a spot remained unsullied. Dankledink's elation at battle had now turned into a cold seriousness. He walked over to the cheese wheel with which he had smote the first of his foes, now covered in blood and with brains and with sharded bone, clove it in half with his bloody sword, and began to eat of it noisily.
"Shouldn't you have spared one to question?"
squeaked Stephus. Dankledink looked up, his mustache foamy with ale, his breath smelling sharply of ale and ripe cheese over the stench of gruesome death, with blood covering his hands, now trailing down his forearms and dripping from his chubby elbows onto the floor, and he paused. "No," he said, "I know already all I need to know of these men, of why they were here, and who sent them." Stephus was quaking. "My boy, they came intent upon you." Dankledink's words fell upon unhearing ears. Stephus was fainted upon the floor once more.